Welcome to this how-to screencast on working with queries in SQL Server Management Studio. We're going to look at working with queries in SQL Server Management Studio. And to do that, we're going to need an editing window. And one of the ways to get an editing window is to just type Control-N on your keyboard, or you can click on New Query right over here. And what this has done for us is open up a connection dialog. Editing windows in Management Studio are a little bit different from the ones you work with in Visual Studio for things like C# and Visual Basic. Editing windows in Management Studio always have a connection to some server. If you're going to be working with T-SQL queries, you'll connect to a database engine. If you're working with analysis services queries, you'll connect to an analysis services server. And you can go in, type in the name of the server, you can pull it from this drop down here, you can use Windows authentication, or if your server supports it, you can use SQL Server authentication. So let's connect to this Dark Matter 5 server. And what this has done is opened up an MDI, a multiple document interface window for me. And it's on connection 51. This is sometimes called the PROC ID, short for process ID, but we're connected to connection 51. And if I need another editing window, I can go and click on New Query. I'll get another editing window. And notice that one is on connection 52. Every editing window has a different connection. Now these are MDI windows, so I can do MDI things. I can come up to this Windows menu and say I want to bring the other window up on top. Or I can come and say, gee, what I'd really like to do is tile these windows so I can be working on two different queries at once. Now, if you want, you can also have a tabbed presentation. A lot of things are using tabbed presentations in preference to this MDI kind of environment, and you control that by going to Tools, Options, and going to the environment or the general environment. And you can switch between tabbed and MDI. Now, you don't have to restart the editor to do this. You can switch back and forth whenever you want. So I'll say OK. And now I have tabbed windows. Sometimes it doesn't always clean up, but just go and hit the tabs and that'll clean up anything hanging around there that's made. Now each of these editing windows has a connection to a server, and you can work with that connection. If you do a right mouse button on one of these windows and bring up its context menu, you'll see there's a connection option, and I can disconnect this window, I can go and disconnect all the windows, or I can change what I'm connected to. Now the reason sometimes you want to use these disconnections is if you're doing some database management stuff like maybe dropping a table or something, sometimes a connection to the database will prevent you from doing that. So this gives you a way to break those connections while you're doing that maintenance stuff, or to just change to another database if you so desire. Now SQL Server Management Studio supports IntelliSense. And IntelliSense may be on or off when you initially open a window, and it's your choice how you want it to work. I happen to have things configured so that IntelliSense is not turned on when I create a new window. But if I go to this icon right here, I can click on it and turn on IntelliSense, and you can see that it's on. And this is a by window selection. If I go to this window over here, IntelliSense is not on that window because by default when I open a new window it's not on, just the way I happen to configure it. You can configure it whichever way you want, and the way you get to that configuration is to go down to Tools, Options, and then go down to the text editor, go down to Transact SQL, go down to IntelliSense, and this is where you select whether or not you want a new window to have IntelliSense enabled or not. If you want new windows to have IntelliSense enabled, check that box. If you don't, uncheck it. So here we have a window that has IntelliSense enabled in it. So what will it do for us? Well, IntelliSense in Management Studio isn't quite as spiffy as it is in Visual Studio. For example, if I want to do a select statement, I might type SEL and type Control Spacebar, expecting it to do completion on that keyword for me, but it doesn't really do it. I got to spell it out, so I say S-E-L-E-C-T. And notice what happened. As soon as I spelled it out, it turned blue. There's syntax coloring in Management Studio, and you can control how things are colored. You can come down here to Tools, Options, and you got to go up to the Environment, Fonts, and Colors. And if you scroll way down here, you'll see keywords are colorized. They're blue, and they use the Courier font. And you can go and adjust this to work any way you happen to want it to. Now, once I'm into my query, I want to do something. It turns out I want to select some columns out of the Employees table. that I know is in this CTE ranking partitioning database. It's one of the sample databases for one of the modules in the SQL course. So I want to specify some column names there, and I'm going to do it with two-part names for a couple of reasons. Usually it's a good idea to do that, and secondly, the IntelliSense works better if I do it that way. So if I type E, what's going to come up is all the things I could possibly put there, but it'll be highlighted on the first thing that begins with an E. So you can see there are all these other things are possible things I could put there. So, but I want to use the employees table. And since I'm going to be naming columns, I'm going to type a dot. It'll do completion for me, and now it's ready for me to go and pick the second part of that two-part name to name the column. So at this point, I want to put the first name here, so I can type F. And now it highlighted F. Obviously, this is the same sort of drill. It will move down to the first F, and if I have to go farther, I can use the arrow keys. And I'm going to add another column, so I'll just type a column, type an E, employees, dot to get that. I want to go and put the last name here, comma, and then I'll do employees again, dot, and I want to put the shift number here, like this. Okay, so I've got the columns that I want. Notice that they all have little squigglies underneath of them. That's IntelliSense again. What it's telling me is it says you've picked some column names, but there aren't any tables in this query that have those column names. Well, of course there aren't, because I haven't specified any tables yet. So let's go and specify the table. I want to go and put in a from. Notice it turned blue. I can type E. That will give me employees. And I'm going to terminate this with a semicolon because I'm going to stick to the new syntax for SQL. And now you'll see all of the squigglies went away because these columns, in fact, do exist in the employees table. And if I go and do something over here like misspell select, because this is a query, it'll say, oh, you didn't spell it right. So let me go and type a T there and get it right. So the IntelliSense allows us to do completion on names of objects that are in the database, like column names, table names, and all those kinds of things. And its syntax colorizes keywords and other things that you put in the error messages and stuff like that. Comments will end up being colorized too, like this is a comment, like so. And they're colorized green. And again, you can control all that. So we do have IntelliSense in here, and it's fairly useful. However, there's another problem you lots of times run into when you're writing your scripts. Sometimes you want to do some database management type things, like you want to go and drop a table, and that seems like it's pretty easy. You can say drop table name. What's the big deal to that? Well, if you're going to put that in a script, usually what you mean is drop the table if it exists. Otherwise, don't drop it. And the reason you do that is if you go and drop a non-existent table, it'll create a spurious error, and somebody's going to have to figure out that it isn't important when it pops up. So you'd rather not do that. You'd rather say, if table exists, drop it. But you can't quite do it like that. What you have to do is drill into the metadata in SQL Server. Relational databases are required to define everything that makes up the database in the database. This is one of Dr. Codd's 12 rules. E.F. Codd invented relational databases. He was a scientist at IBM at the time when he did it. And he came up with a number of rules that were required for a database to be relational, and one of them was you have to define everything about the database in the database. You can't have any files on the side with a list of tables or anything like that. But what isn't specified is where that metadata lives. And every database vendor goes and uses a different set of things to go and get to the metadata. And SQL Server's no different. So if you're going to go and put in a full-fledged drop table if, you're going to have to drill out all that metadata, but the chances are you're not going to remember where everything is. So Management Studio has another thing that's really useful. They're called templates. And templates in Management Studio are very similar, in spirit at least, to snippets in Visual Studio. So in order to use templates, you have to bring up the Template Explorer. And the way you bring up the Template Explorer is to go to the View menu and say Template Explorer, or use Control-Alt-T. So let's bring up the Template Explorer. And there are templates for the different kinds of services SQL Server provides. These are database templates like the things you'll use for T-SQL stuff. These are analysis services templates. And this is an Explorer the way you'd expect it to be. It's a tree of all these little folder icons, and the folders roll up other things, sometimes other folders, sometimes templates. And for example, all of the templates for working with a database are in this folder. Or if I go way down here to Table, open this up, these are templates for working with tables. Now, the way you go and work with templates or use them is to just go and double-click the template that you want, like this. And I'm going to close this just to get it out of our way. And what it does is it opens up another editing window for you. In fact, you can see this is on, sorry about that, this is on connection 53. Notice this guy's on 51, this guy's on 52. So all it did was open up an editing window and drop some stuff into it. In fact, you could get the same effect by literally typing this text in here. Once you've double-clicked that template, the Template Explorer is out of the picture. It has no connection anymore. And the syntax of templates is pretty simple. They're a mixture of literal text and template parameters. And a template parameter is marked in the text by wrapping it in these pointies. So the left pointy starts a template parameter and the right pointy ends it. This isn't XML, this is just the way they go in mark templates in here. And every template parameter has three parts. The first part is called the name of the parameter. And if it turns out that same parameter name is used in more than one parameter, the implication is, in fact the requirement is, that both of those parameters are replaced with the same value. And we'll see how we can go, we'll see the UI that Management Studio gives us to do these replacements in just a second. We're going to go over the syntax right now first. Then the second part of a parameter, which is separated by from the first by this comma here, is called the type. So what this is telling us, I want a schema name, and the data type of that schema name has to be a sysname. And that makes sense because objects in SQL Server are always named with a data type called sysname, and it's not that complicated. It tells you things like, well, the sysname can't start with a space, that kind of stuff. However, this is really just a hint. It doesn't do any type checking. When it's time to fill out the schema name, I can put anything I want there, whether it's a sysname or not, but this is just kind of a reminder for me. Then after this second comma here comes the third part, and that's the default value for this template. And it goes from right after the white space after that comma all the way down to wherever this right pointy is. Whatever is there is the default value for the template. And all that means default value for the parameter. And if you don't fill out that parameter value, in this case, it will use your schema name. So that's the general syntax of a template, some literal text with some parameters embedded in it. And the way we go and make use of a template, and again, the important thing here is it makes no difference how you got this editor window opened with these things wrapped in pointies. It's a template from Management Studio's point of view. And you have to tell it, I want to fill out the values of those parameters. And again, there's a couple of ways to do it. This icon up here, you can click on it to specify the values for template parameters, or I can come over to the query menu, go over to the query menu, sorry about that, and say specify values for template parameters, or type Control-Shift-M. So we'll pick it from here. And we'll get this, this grid type GUI coming up here. And all it does is look at all the things that begin with a left pointy and say, those are parameters. Let me go and make rows in this grid as a place to keep track of those parameters. And then what you do is go over to the value column and fill it out with whatever you want. Notice, once again, this says this has to be a sysname, but I can put anything I want in here. I can put numbers that start with a couple spaces. It won't stop me. So again, that's only a hint. But I'll put DBO here because there's a lot of things that end up in DBO. And then I can put in my table name, my table, whatever I want to call it, TABLE, like this. And now what will happen is when I close this dialog is it will fill out those parameters, and I can close it a couple of ways. I can click on OK here, or I can do a carriage return to lock in that value in that edit cell in that grid, and then go and type carriage return again, and it will fill out my template. And once again, when you look at this, you'll see that DBO appeared in 2 places. Likewise, my table appeared in 2 places because the same parameter was in multiple places in this template. And one of the really nice things about templates is if I want to do a drop table that only drops tables that actually exist, notice that it went and drilled out all of the metadata, all of the logic to see if that particular table name existed. And only if it did it go and execute the drop table. And again, you'd probably never remember all that stuff. So for all of those built-in templates that we have that come with Visual Studio to do database management, it has all that metadata knowledge built into them so that you don't have to remember it. Okay, that's pretty neat. Another thing you can do with templates, of course, is make your own. And the way that you do that, you can do it a couple of ways, but typically if you're going to add your own templates, what you should really do is add a folder to hold your templates. And the way you do that is, and again, this is a typical Explorer URI, I can do a right mouse click on this folder and I can say I want to make a new folder. And there it is. And I'll just call it my TPLS, my templates, like this. And then if I want to add a template to this folder, I can do a right click on it and get its context menu and say I want to make a new template. And I'll call this stuff, just to give it a name. And now I've created a template. I've created an empty template. There's nothing in there. If I go and double click this, what I'll do is it'll open up a new editing window, 54, but it'll be blank because obviously I didn't put anything into it. And at this point, I might be tempted to start making my template here, filling out stuff in there. And that would not be a good idea because when you double click one of these templates in here, it opens up an editing window and Management Studio thinks this is just another editing window. If you want to go and save it, I'll save it as SQL Query 35, like the next one would be SQL Query 36 and so on. It won't be saved in the place that the Template Explorer expects to find templates. So you don't want to go and fill out your initial template that way. What you want to do is get the context menu on your template and say I want to go and edit it. And then you can go and proceed to do your editing, and we'll go make a silly little template here. I'll call this name, and I'll say family name. Again, this does not have to be a real data type. And I'll put in the default value as Smith. There's a family name. And then I'll just put in some literal text. Again, doesn't have to be SQL. And I can say nickname like this, and I'll put in the data type should be diminutive, like so, and I'll make the default value SMIDI, like so. Okay, so I've made my template. I'll put a carriage return into. You don't have to, but I would like a carriage return in this template. And then once I've done this, I can go and save this the way I would save anything, except it's going to get saved specially. Notice the name is not SQL Query 35 or anything like that. It's stuff.sql. It matches the name that I have in here. So I can go and bring up the context menu on this tab and say save. And now let's go and close that and confirm that we actually saved it, like this. And there we've got our template, and if we want to go and use it, we can click on the specify values icon right here, and I can go and put in Jones. Come down here and say J-O-N-C-Y, Jonesy, for the nickname like this. And it goes and fills it out just like I said. Now, that's pretty nice. All this stuff is wrapped up in here, all the knowledge of the metadata and all that kind of stuff. And you can make your own templates too, so that's a really good thing. There is one thing that's kind of annoying. I can't really use these templates to drop a piece of code in line. If I wanted to add something else here, use another template, when I go and click on a template in here, it opens up a brand new editing window, and I can go and fill out the params and do a copy paste and all that. It's just a little bit irritating. But in some cases these templates are totally self-contained, so it's not a big deal. But that's just the way that it works. So we've been looking at how to work with queries in Management Studio. And to work with a query, you need an editing window, so you can use Control-N or you can use the New Query button over here. Every editing window that's opened has a connection to some database. So if you have 5 windows open, you're going to have 5 connections to the database. You can go in and break those connections if you have to for doing maintenance sorts of things. The editing windows themselves do support IntelliSense. It's not quite as spiffy as Visual Studio, but it will do completion on object names and stuff like that. And lastly, SQL or Management Studio has templates which act a lot like snippets in Visual Studio, and they encapsulate a lot of the knowledge about the metadata to do typical kinds of maintenance things. And you can add your own templates if you wish to do so.